Hello and welcome to Experts Corner. This is Maheen Jafri. Well, let's talk about Pakistan's war against terrorism. Pakistan is once again facing a resurgence in violence, and these attacks have been lately on the security forces, civilians and public infrastructure as well across KP and Balochistan. Recent incidents include suicide attacks and cross-border terror assaults, and all this has highlighted basically the evolving nature of threat and persistent challenge that Pakistan is facing from groups like TTP and other such extremist outfits. Now, in response, Pakistan has, of course, intensified its IBOs and secured strengthened border management as well, and renewed its commitment to eliminate all kinds of terrorism as Pakistan advances its counterterrorism operations. The challenge is just not to neutralize these militant networks, but it is also to address the root cause of what's actually causing this violence. This would be the first segment of our program. Second segment of the program would be about the US and Iran crisis. Once again, the geopolitical flashpoint that we all see making headlines. Recent weeks, we know that have witnessed heightened tensions over security, regional stability and Strait of Hormuz. While US signals there would be talks with Iran starting soon, at the same time we see that Iran negating any such claims. US President said that new negotiations would start that would cover the Strait of Hormuz as well, and he said talks for its part. Iran says that they are not in talks with the US. Instead, they're trying to negotiate with Iran over a new route from the Strait of Hormuz. So there are a lot of dimensions to this conflict as well that we'll discuss during the course of our show. For details and analysis, we've been joined by Farrukh Pitafi in our studio and Mr. Asif Durrani, former ambassador, joining us. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining.
Thank you.
Mr. Asif Durrani, if we talk about the cycle of violence, the resurgence of Pakistan, even if we talk about the Sawat incident which has killed 17 people, how do you see this resurgence despite the counterterrorism efforts that Pakistan is putting?
Well, I think we should not expect that this terrorism menace is going to vanish anytime soon. We have to live with that and have to take precautions as well as measures to neutralize those terrorists who, in fact, want to dictate their agenda through the barrel of the gun. There's no shortcut to it, and what is needed is that you urgently need the support of the local people, that they should discourage giving sanctuaries to these terrorists, whether they are TTP or BLA or anyone. So for that to happen, I think people's involvement would be very important. And these surges which you have seen is that from where they spring up all of a sudden. It means they were hiding somewhere, and someone had, in fact, given them a sanctuary, and which is why that they attacked. Of course, they are also killed in the process, but at the same time, that they have got the initiative and they initiate this violence and death and destruction. That, in fact, needs to be neutralized immediately, and that is only possible, as I said, with the help of the people. Yes.
Ambassador Durrani, what do you think? It's just not neutralizing the militant networks. There are factors as well. There are root causes as well. How do you explain the factors that are there, and how would we really go about dealing with those factors?
Well, root causes, when you talk about it, we were part of the war against terror, but these people, they, in fact, did not accept government of the day's decision to join the war on terror. It happened after 9/11, and then if you look at it, they have a skewed view about the international affairs. They don't understand what the UN Security Council resolutions under Chapter 7 mean. For instance, Resolution 1368 and 1373 adopted under Chapter 7 call upon the member states to take action against these terrorist groups. Whether these states like it or not, they have to comply with those resolutions because those have been adopted under Chapter 7. And they defied it. And the reason was, and then, yes, there's also an issue of common tribes on both sides of the border. They give sanctuary to each other. And then to a greater extent, it is actually the ideology. Ideology doesn't mean it comes with the tribal traditions. So the tribal tradition as well as religious ideology that in fact goes hand in hand as far as Afghanistan and Pakistan's tribal areas are concerned. Afghanistan is almost all tribal except for a few ethnic groups, but Pakistan's KP province and Balochistan are tribal and they follow the tribal tradition. And that tradition is that once it is decided, so the whole tribe has to obey that. Which is why you have seen that they killed the Malaks and tribal elders, these TTP guys, or before that, the groups which had cropped up after the 9/11. So here it's a mixed package, and we have to, in fact, evolve a strategy whereby the pull factor should be stronger than the push factor. And pull factor is that government has to then initiate those programs under which the people don't remain unemployed. For instance, for FOTA, when it was merged in 2018, it was decided that 1 trillion rupees would be spent for the upkeep and development of the tribal areas, former tribal areas. However, till last year, only 80 billion rupees were spent. What happened to other 910 $20 billion rupees? Those could not be absorbed, and that is the, you can say, incompetence of the successive governments that they have been ruling the province. Yeah.
Right. Ambassador Durrani, because there has been a surge in these ghastly, dastardly terrorist acts, one sees that the techniques of the terrorists are also evolving. One thing is that what is being called a double tap attack. There is an incident, and as forces rush to the occasion, there again they are ambushed by the terrorists. So how important is technology in fighting this menace at this moment? And do you think that we are anywhere close to implementing national, action plan?
Technology will always play a role, but don't forget that the United States, with extremely, sophisticated technology used in Afghanistan, had to leave the country because on the political plane it was not succeeding. It was basically the local tribal people. We all know that Taliban had a sway almost on 70% of the country while Karzai or Ashwani were ruling. So it means that if there is a local support, or by fear or for favor, they get the sanctuaries, and then they, in fact, can go in hiding. And this is precisely what is happening right now in our merged districts, as well as in Balochistan, and especially in the southern Balochistan. Yeah.
Ambassador Durrani, we know that military force alone cannot eradicate the root causes, the extremism, the ideology as well. So there are many factors that we need as a solution as well. How important do you think are the governance reforms or the education as the community is concerned, or the resilience of the community when we come to eradicate this menace?
It's very much important, but there are some interesting cases to study. While TTP guys, overwhelming majority is illiterate, they are jahils, but not the BLA people. They are, those who are leading the charge are all educated people. So there's a dichotomy, but these are two different studies. But both are terrorists. They have adopted the terrorism route, and that needs to be addressed in right earnest, and while diagnosing the root causes. And I have already mentioned that. I don't want to repeat that.
Right. Regarding cooperation with Afghanistan and other countries, you are absolutely right when you talk about the imperative of international law. But it seems that Afghan government, as you called it as well, is more or less jahil. So they are not cooperating. How do you actually build consensus in the region to ensure, especially because you have the domain knowledge, you have the domain experience, Could you tell us how exactly to work with other partners in the region to ensure that Afghanistan is complying with the demands or expectations that are there?
It's a very good question, Farrukh. You have to actually redouble your efforts to include all the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan. That those unwanted elements who want to take the law into their hands are not encouraged, and they are to be discouraged. Similarly, the Taliban regime has to be forced by all that they have to comply with their international obligation if they want legitimacy. Because right now the dilemma is that they care less about the UN obligations. They care less about the obligations which Afghanistan, as an entity of the international community, like different covenants and human rights instruments to which it's a party, and they have their own view of humanity, and then anything which they want to reject, they would say it is against Islam. Now, this is a nonsensical view about promoting Islam. Rather, they are making a mockery of Islam at the international level, knowing full well that OIC unanimously has called upon the Taliban not to discontinue the girls' education, allow them to go for education to any levels, and they have not agreed to that. Our ulama who went to Kabul and tried to convince them that they should resume girls' education, they only entertained them, offered them, good hospitality, but they refused to accept those pleadings, while they themselves, these Taliban who are right now in power, were studying in the madrasas of those esteemed scholars. So this is a dilemma you are facing, and that in a way is creating repulsion and reversion within the Afghan society. Already women folk are against the Taliban. Then non-Pashtun and ethnic groups are against the Taliban. And now Pashtuns have started, in fact, becoming restless. And there are reports that whether in Kandahar or in some other provinces, although Badakhshan is not a Pashtun-dominated province. So there are reports of unrest. And you can say that right now it has been started among the non-Pashtun groups, but Pashtuns, the day won't be far off that when the Pashtuns would also take up arms. So that would create problems for Afghanistan, and by implication, it would also be a problem for Pakistan, as the history shows.
Right. Ambassador Durrani, we have conducted multiple counterterrorism operations. Do you think the latest one, or the Azm-E-Istehkam operation, is it providing a sufficient framework when we talk about addressing the evolving terrorism challenges, for example, coordination in the institutions or eradicating the militant networks, and how effective they've been and how effective would they be in the future as well?
These operations are necessary when we have 100% correct information. Due care has to be taken that innocent people are not killed as a result of these operations. So this is important. Ground-based operations would be recommended inside Afghanistan, but there are Afghan people who are also dissatisfied with their regime, and more importantly, I think I stand corrected, but I haven't seen any top TTP leader has been neutralized so far. So I think once that process starts, that would discourage the Taliban cadres. Yes.
Right. Just like we are trying to learn something from Azm-E-Istehkam, what are the lessons that we have drawn from operations like Raddul Fasad or, Zarb-E-Azm in tackling the current wave of terrorism and in evolving our solutions as well, along with the challenges?
Well, I think that's an ongoing process. It would be too early to say what results we can derive from this operation. But one thing is clear that there's no trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Visas are not issued to Afghan nationals and even to their patients. That is not a good policy. I think you have to win hearts and minds of the people. And the Taliban, in my view, is a temporary phenomenon. They are not there to stay permanently. This is at least the experience we have about Afghanistan, at least for the past 5 decades. So the Afghan patience threshold at the political level is very short. So you have to, it would be a matter of months or say a few years that we'll see, people rising up. So for that to happen, I think we should not annoy the people. This is my sincere recommendation. Yeah.
That is a very important one, sir. Earlier, you were talking about situation there, and you thought that it is only a matter of time before Pashtuns on the other side of the border are going to also put up any fight. Do you see any prospect of that even now? Because I don't see any political element among the Pashtun population that might be putting up any kind of resistance at all. And secondly, because you were talking about the operations on the other side of the border, how good is our understanding of topography there? And do you think that that topography also might have posed a challenge because our adjoining areas are used against us by the Taliban or TTP?
I think people know the topography. That should not be a problem. And in any case, we are not going into a full-fledged military action as far as topography is concerned from a military point of view. And that is for sure. But overall, when you talk about the patience threshold inside Afghanistan, unfortunately, there has not been a political training in Afghanistan. Whatever political processes you have seen during Zahir Shah's time or during Sardar Daoud's time, there were, fits and starts, and then they would end up in jail. Then came the communists. They enacted a coup, which could not last, say, from 78 till the arrival of the Soviet troops. And then for another 8-9 years, when the Soviet troops were there, they could sustain, but they could sustain by using the Soviet crutches. And once they left, so in a matter of 2 years, 3 years, that system collapsed. So Najibullah also collapsed. And the result was Mujahideen. When Mujahideen came, they did not have the political training or somehow they could not evolve a modus vivendi whereby they could rule collectively. So there were 7 parties, and they were all parties. They considered themselves, and their leaders considered themselves as potential president or potential prime minister. So the result was civil war, and it came from within this civil war conditions came these Taliban 1.0. You saw that what kind of a rule that was. Of course, Pakistan is being blamed for that we created a Taliban. But that is nonsensical because you can't create anyone, and especially with regard to Afghanistan, these are wrong assumptions. But only since Afghan political side and their commentators they are out to malign Pakistan, so they use this language. But what you have seen during the past 20 years after 9/11, what happened? President Karzai and President Ashraf Ghani, they were paratrooped by the Americans. They, in fact, introduced the American Constitution, and it was cut and paste and made one Constitution. Their elections were held on non-party basis, and while there were more than 80 parties in Afghanistan, so this it's a hodgepodge system which they call democratic system. In that system, only it was the American money which was sustaining the facade of so-called democracy. But there was no democracy. Karzai was not a popular leader, or Ashraf Ghani was not a popular leader. And they did not belong to any political party, or there was no ruling party in the country. So these are the facts. And now, after 9/11, after these 20 years of war, the irony is that Americans deposing Taliban again handed over power to the Taliban. And
Right.
somehow our people also, in fact, celebrated that. But now we have burnt our fingers after 5 years. Yes.
Right. Ambassador Durrani, there's something very pertinent that relates to what is happening nowadays. There's a heavy usage of social media. These militant organizations or networks are heavily relying on these platforms, not just for the recruitment, for the propaganda, for the communication. You know, every day there's a new challenge for our armed and security forces. How can Pakistan counter that?
Pakistan can counter that through transparency. That is important. I give you one example. When India attacked Pakistan last year, we maintained transparency. The result was that Indian narrative was not bought by any country anywhere or the media. And they, in fact, were holding information while our side, from the armed forces, they were imparting information, whatever was available. So the result was that on the narrative front, you won the war, this propaganda war. Here, same is the case here in Afghanistan. Those who try to malign Pakistan, or for that matter, the Taliban who think that they can perhaps continue with this malignant attitude, they will not survive. For that to happen, I think we have to beat them in their own game, whether it is religious, that you have to challenge them who are their esteemed scholars who can actually plead to, or who can qualify to rule the country. One thing. Secondly, what rights of the people have been observed? That needs to be highlighted every now and then at every forum. Thirdly, more importantly, the women's rights need to be highlighted at all forums. This is, and from day one, we were, in fact, raising that. We, in fact, were raising with the Taliban also that what you are going to do, say, after 20 years, if your women folk, they get sick, they fall sick, are you going to show them to men doctors? So, and then they had no answer for that because they, privately they would say that they are beholden to the dictates of Mullah Heptullah. So there is also a simmering unrest within the Taliban hierarchy also. So these are the issues we have to fight at the narrative front, and that we have to again redouble our efforts in countering those anti-Pakistan propaganda, or say eulogizing TTP or the PLA. We have to redouble our efforts. Yeah.
Right. Ambassador Sahab, your analogy is important because you spoke about India and everybody thinks that behind Afghan Taliban and these groups' propaganda might also be India's finance. But having said that, there seems to be a kind of discrepancy between what we were trying to achieve then and what we are actually facing right now. India was a state actor. You could show that it is failing and we managed to succeed, and that actually worked. But here the purpose of the terrorist is to terrorize. If you actually start giving granular details immediately as that happens, for example, a terrorist attack takes place, it might further spread terror. So how do you propose Pakistan actually handle that? Because the gray area that might emerge because of this is utilized by the terrorists to keep on pushing its own propaganda.
Well, they will continue, but you have to be transparent as far as, say, if we have casualties, we should be open in telling that how much losses we have incurred. And when we have casualties on the other side, we should be very clear. One. Secondly, we should expose the Afghan Taliban and their double-faced policy, because they tell us that Afghan soil would not be allowed to be used against any country. It's not any country. We are talking about Pakistan. And more importantly, they have to choose between Pakistan or TTP. And they are silent on that. They would not condemn the acts of the TTP. And then worrisome aspect is that the TTP formations coming from Afghanistan also have the Afghan component. The Afghan people, the militants or Taliban, they are joining them. So these are serious issues which need to be tackled both militarily as well as diplomatically and at the narrative front. That's important. Regarding India, from Pakistan's independence onwards, in fact, that this Pashtunistan bogey was actually promoted by India. All India Radio used to serve as Radio Pashtunistan. And then India's modus operandi has been very simple. That to keep Pakistan under pressure, they had to nominate Afghan officials, grease their palms, and they would sing the Indian song. And this has continued since then, from Zahir Shah to Daud to then communists. In any case, they were Indians were supporting the communist rule in Afghanistan. So they had a complete sway they were using, and that's the time when Indians, in fact, went to Siachen. They dished Pakistan because Pakistan was busy in tackling this Afghan crisis, and then subsequently when Mujahideen. After a while,
Mr. Asif Durrani, absolutely. Thank you so much, sir, for joining in. Unfortunately, we are a little pressed with time. We really appreciate your time and your presence in our show. We hope you join us soon. Right now, ladies and gentlemen, we've been joined by Brigadier Retired Syed Nazir, defense analyst, joining us from Peshawar. Thank you so much, sir, for joining in.
Thank you indeed.
Sir, how would you comment on the latest counterterrorism efforts that are evolving every day along with the challenges that we are facing in terms of terrorism?
Thank you. As far as the terrorist and counter narrative, as well as the fighting against these outfits which are operating from Afghanistan, Fitnatul Khawarij and Fitnatul Hindustan, in the KP and especially in the Baluchistan. Well, in Baluchistan, the Shaban operation is going on, and they are taking these terrorist outfits and their sanctuaries as well as their hideouts inside Pakistan and haunting them. And it is a combined operation by the police, by the FCL, by the army, and using those weapons which are suitable in their terrain because it is a rugged terrain and very vast area. And the posts, etc., they are located at a very, very long distances. But at the same time, these terrorist outfits, since they are terrorists, so they have got no regards for any religion, for any ethnicity, or for any tradition. They are targeting the soft targets like isolated posts, like the transport network, or the people who are working for the minerals in various areas, and of course, then they are attacking various villages and forcefully recruiting and then intimidating as well as exploiting all these things. But at the same time, Pakistan is determined to wipe them out, and naturally, once they are operating from, or rather they are planning as well as their weapons, and all support is being provided from Afghanistan. And of the Indian, they are the Afghanistan government, or rather the regime is operating like a proxy of India. And then these outfits are again the proxies of Afghanistan. So naturally, in such a situation, once Pakistan has dusted their Air Force in May 2025. So naturally now the Doval doctrine is there, and they are coming indirectly, and these mercenaries are being used. But at the same time,
Brigadier Saab, we are going to talk about Doval doctrine also, and there is so much that can be discussed. But let us first talk about the tactics of the terrorists. We have seen something eerie that is evolving right now. Now the terrorists seem to actually go for a double attack. First they create an incident, then these authorities rush to the place, and there also they attack the security forces in an ambush. How to actually tackle that, especially perhaps drones could help, perhaps more technology or AI or satellite imagery could help. Could you actually shed some light on that?
Yes, of course. So what you pointed to, that is a sort of tactics. We call it that first the attack is there is an attack party, and that is also supported by the cutoff party. And the cutoff party is responsible to stop any reinforcement going to that area, so that they could be beefed up, the defense could be beefed up, or they could round up these terrorists who are operating from that area. So that is one of the tactics they are using. Previously, they used to use the they will attack and then they will vanish, or hit and run technique. But now they have resorted to this particular thing, and there is another aspect that they are using also the drones and surveillance, etc. They are doing the local drones, which are being provided by the Afghan government through India, and more so these smugglers, etc. They are also helping them, and their facilitators are also there. So what the security forces are supposed to do, that they have to put their strategy or their tactics in reverse slope.
Retired Saad Nazir, we definitely agree to your viewpoint. Of course, they are using the latest equipment. They are being funded, yes, of course, and that's what we are all here for, to fight this terrorism war as a united nation. This is just not going to be happening militarily, but diplomatically as well, and you know, developing the narrative. With that, we take you to the second segment of our program, which is, of course, about the US and Iran crisis. The kind of developments that are taking place is really putting a question mark on a lot of things. We've been joined by Mr. Adam Weinstein, Deputy Director, Middle East Program, Quincy Institute, responsible Statecraft. Thank you so much, sir, for joining in.
Thanks for having me.
Mr. Adam, there's a difference of narrative, as usual, that we see. The U.S. says that the negotiations have been started with Iran. Iran denies it publicly, and that puts a lot of question mark on the credibility of the diplomatic efforts that are taking place behind closed doors.
Well, I think it puts a question mark on the trust deficit that exists between the two sides. And look, the Iranians have a reason to deny that negotiations are taking place. I tend to believe they are taking place because the Trump administration held off on a new wave of attacks.
Right. Also, how do you look at the negotiations of Iran with Oman? They say that they are talking and working on a new route in the Strait of Hormuz. Would that be going towards a state of completion, do you think?
I have no idea. You know, there's a lot of conflicting reports. I mean, I'll give you one example. CNN reported today that a CENTCOM official had, sent an email to a broad group of military analysts saying, quote, "We are looking for new, creative, and unconventional ways to pressure and punish Iran." So that doesn't suggest that they're close to an agreement. Of course, they could be close to an agreement and they're still preparing to return to war. We just don't know.
Right. Also, how do you look at the other dimensions? I mean, we talk about the role of mediation, the way Oman is trying to play a part, and still there's a lot of back and forth going on. How do you look at the role of those countries, especially Oman?
Oman was historically a go-between between Iran and the United States. It's played that role for well over a decade now. I mean, it was partially responsible for the JCPOA. And whenever there has been a dispute between Iran and the United States, it was Oman that acted as a mediator, and then Qatar played a bigger role, and then, of course, most recently Pakistan. So it's not surprising.
Right. Mr. Weinstein, could you also speak to the possibility of, peace building in the region? It seems that we have a kind of limitation on how much escalation there can be, but there doesn't seem to be a pure, uncontended peace either. Is there a possibility of some kind of negotiated settlement, and what exactly will it take to reach there?
You know, the problem with the negotiated peace settlement is there's two actors right now that really matter. Well, three. There's Israel, there's the Iranian political elites, what some people would call the regime, and then there's the Trump administration. And all three of those groups are willing to let this go on for months and months and months. You know, the elites in Iran view this contest as something that they must come out of looking strong. They cannot capitulate to the Trump administration. That would be more dangerous than any amount of bombing the Trump administration can do to them. You know, for Trump, I think Trump is, you know, he has some pressure in the United States in terms of rising prices, but other than that, this is still far away and hasn't produced that many U.S. casualties. And the Israelis would love to see this through. I mean, you know, their ideal situation would be regime change in Iran. But for the region itself, the region is really feeling the pain. None of these you know, economic projects can go through. I use Iraq as an example. On the same day that they were signing an agreement for the development road, which is a corridor that's supposed to traverse all of Iraq and connect it with Turkey and Europe, on that same day, they were bombed by the United States and Saudi Arabia, due in part to a provocation by Iran-aligned militias inside Iraq. So these kinds of big projects, this economic development, you can't go through so long as this war continues. And just as we're feeling economic pain in the United States, I know you're feeling economic pain in Pakistan too.
Absolutely. We are, but let us talk about another country. Particularly, you spoke about Iran, that its leadership might actually want to continue the war till the time it actually looks a victor. But the concern right now is that of all the countries, perhaps Iran is the most badly affected by economic pain. On one side, inflation is through the roof. It was even before the start of this war. Now supplies are dwindling and infrastructure is in shambles. Do you think that they still can continue the war despite so much pain on the streets, sir?
Well, yes, because it's an asymmetric war. You know, for the United States to open the Strait of Hormuz, it has to ensure that every single ship that passes through is safe. For Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz, all it has to do is attack one ship, simply one ship, and then insurance premiums go up. Ship crews don't want to cross the straits. Companies won't send their ships. So it's much easier for them to keep this going. They are feeling a lot of pain. The question is, does the pain change their calculation? I mean, you heard what I said earlier about CENTCOM wanting new and creative ideas to produce pain. Obviously, the sanctions and the bombings haven't produced enough pain to change the calculation on the Iranian side. The Iranian government is known for being stubborn, is known for having a high pain threshold, and they don't want to be seen as capitulating to the Trump administration because that will undermine everything they claim to represent.
Mr. Weinstein, looking at the statements coming from Washington, do you think it's coming from President Trump? He announces a breakthrough right before the financial markets open on Monday, and exactly like we see, oil prices have fell and the fluctuations that we've been seeing in the market.
Yeah, I do think that's a strategy of the Trump administration. I think they like to put high pressure on the Iranians on Friday when the news cycle slows down, when the markets have closed, and see what happens over the weekend. And then they try to say that there's been some good news right before the markets open. I do think that's a strategy they use.
Right. How about we talk about Israel? It's conducting military drills on ground and naval forces as well. What do you think is Israel preparing for?
Well, I think Israel knows that if there's an escalation between the United States and Iran, and it's a significant escalation, that the Iranians will attack Israel. The Israelis have taken a step back in the last month or so, or a couple months even, and I think they've been happy to see this tit for tat between the Iranians and the United States. But they do know that if there's an escalation, Iran will attack Israel. Iran hasn't attacked Israel in the past several weeks because I think Iran itself was trying to keep things from escalating too far out of control. But as you see, you know, in the last few days with Iran's ballistic missile attacks and so forth, they've changed their calculation, and I think the Israelis know this, and they might re-enter the war as an active participant.
Right. I thought that perhaps because of the imminent elections in Israel, everybody is giving them wide berth because if they start or agitate a war, perhaps that can actually help Netanyahu come back to power. But again, since you actually spoke about this war continuing for a longer period of time. Could you actually put a number to that abstraction? Because it is very important right now to understand how long can this last. Do you think that there's a possibility that we might see an end to this within months, or then we are talking about years?
I don't know. Look, in the case of the elections in Israel, by the way, even if Netanyahu were to lose power, that might improve things a little bit domestically in Israel. And I do think Netanyahu is particularly particularly toxic to the situation, and is willing to sacrifice not only regional lives but his own country in pursuit of power. But I don't think, even if the government changed in Israel, I don't think the fundamental calculations about Iran or the Palestinians would change that quickly. I don't think we would see a real change in Israeli foreign policy. But you never know. There's always a chance for a refresh and maybe a change of heart. In the case of how long can this go? Look at Gaza. When October 7th started, did anyone imagine that the war in Gaza was going to last into 2026? I mean, some people will say they did, but I don't think most people imagine that. So these kinds of conflicts do have a way of extending for years, especially when there's periods of intensity followed by periods of quiet. The real limitation for the United States is that we can't keep up with our own military industrial complex. Our military supply chain can't keep up with this war.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. How do you look at the changed security architecture of the Middle East when we talk about the regional stability, or as we see changing alliances every day, there are new developments? Saudi Arabia, it announced a new defense alliance as well.
Wait, sorry, repeat that question? It broke up slightly.
How do you look at the changed security architecture of the Middle East? There are new alliances every day, like Saudi Arabia announced a defense alliance for free navigation.
Yeah, maybe, but again, these alliances that happen, it depends how real they are. I mean, alliances are still subjected to politics. I mean, as an example, Turkey is a member of NATO. And yet, the United States and Turkey were in some ways on opposing sides during the war in Syria at certain points. The United States was backing Kurds, and Turks were fighting Kurds, and yet we're NATO allies. Turkey has a strong relationship with Russia, even during the war in Ukraine, and yet again, it's a NATO ally. So I'm just using that because that's a long-standing alliance between the United States and Turkey that nobody would deny, and even that is pressurized by politics. The same thing is going to be true for these new alliances in the Gulf that have only lasted a matter of months.
Right. I tell you something that I was expecting today, because I keep on following your work and I keep on following the data work by the institution that you work for as well, Quincy Institute. I was hoping that I'm going to hear some good news in coming days. But you have told me that it can be potentially an infinite war. Now the question right now is whether you think that it can further escalate or it will continue as the current rate of slow burn.
The problem is there's these unpredictable escalations that can happen. A hypothetical situation is that Iran launches missiles at a U.S. base, and they don't think they're actually going to kill that many U.S. troops. They're doing it to send a message. But they get lucky and they do kill, let's say, 50 U.S. troops. That would be the kind of escalation that is unpredictable, that would, in a sense, force the Trump administration to escalate even further and bomb, likely bomb more infrastructure targets and produce higher casualties in Iran. I don't think either side wants that. I think both sides think that they're in a negotiation right now, and they're using their respective militaries as a show of force to create pressure at the negotiating table. But that's a very, very dangerous game to play. Again, this could all end if the Trump administration were very serious about negotiating with Iran. The Iranians have also undermined the negotiations. I put a little bit more blame on the Trump administration because they started this war and because I think they haven't accepted that they're going to have to make compromises with the Iranians. But there is a way out. It is going to depend on whether the political leaders in Tehran and Washington decide that they're ready to approach that in a serious way. no effort in Islamabad or Muscat or Doha is going to be able to do that for them. You all can help, but the two decision makers are somewhere in Tehran and in Washington, D.C.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Adam Weinstein, Deputy Director, Middle East Program, Quincy Institute, responsible Statecraft, joining us from New York. We appreciate your time and your comments regarding the current situation of the U.S. and Iran. Thank you, Farrukh Pitafi, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is about the unpredictable situation, the conflict that we see every day happening, and there's no definite end to it, and there seems to be a lot of unpredictability to this whole dynamic. And right now we see negotiations, as per Washington, have been started by Iran, but Iran publicly denies it, saying that it is in contact with the negotiations with Oman, but there is no engagement with the U.S. There are still lots of gaps, ifs and buts and question marks to this dynamic. Let's see what really happens. This is all for tonight's show. It's Maheen Jafri signing off. Stay tuned to Pakistan TV.